At Storyteller Overland's intergalactic headquarters, research has been proceeding to develop a new line of adventure products, which establishes a new standard for quality, technological leadership, and operating excellence. With customer adventure as their primary focus, work has been proceeding on the crudely conceived idea of an instrument that would not only provide inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal NAR meters. Such an instrument, comprised of Ram gears and bearings, Reliance electric motors, Allen Bradley controls, and all monitored by Storyteller's comm software, is the Storyteller Overland's GXV HILT. Now basically the only new principle involved is that instead of power being generated by the relative motion of conductors and fluxes, it's produced by the modal interaction of magnetoreluctance and capacitive diractance. The original machine had a base plate of prefabulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the two spurving bearings were in a direct line with the panametric fan. The lineup consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal vanes so fitted to the ambiphasian lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented. The main winding was of normal Lotus O-deltoid type placed in pandermic semi-bold slots of the stator, every 7th conductor being connected by a non-reversible tremie pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the NAR meters. Moreover, wherever fluorescent score motion is required, it may also be employed in conjunction with a drawn reciprocating dingle arm to reduce sinusoidal deplaneration. The GXV HILT has now reached a high level of development, and it's being successfully used in the operation of adventure seekers. And it's available soon, wherever Storyteller Overland products are sold. What's going on, everyone? Back with another episode of Stuff and Things. Today is unfortunately my last day with the Storyteller HILT, and before it goes back to Storyteller, I wanted to give you guys a little more of an in-depth look at some of my favorite features of this truck. If this is your first time seeing it, you can go back and watch the detailed walkthrough video where I kind of did a high level of everything, exterior, interior, driving, and I answered a bunch of your questions in that video as well. And then you can also check kind of my real world experiment, camping with this thing, cooking, checking out the bed, the shower, all of the live-in functions of this truck. Hopefully I was able to bring you guys all of the content that you were looking for in the short time that I had this truck, but in the future, maybe I'll be able to get my hands on a finished production version of this truck and then cross off some of the things on the list that I may have missed in these past few days. So with that being said, one of the main things that I want to touch on with this truck is the liquid spring suspension on here. It's probably one of the coolest suspension setups that I have ever driven on a vehicle because of how adjustable it is. And I talked about it in the walkthrough, but now I want to actually show you guys the different levels of adjustment. The suspension is essentially using reservoirs and struts to push around hydraulic liquid to change the driving characteristics of the truck. You can set different comfort levels and also ride height as well. The truck is currently sitting at the normal mode, and this was probably one of the most fun things when it came to driving this truck. I didn't get off-road a ton because we are in the dead winter of Colorado, so trails get really messy and there's a lot of snow right now. This truck with this suspension would really shine, of course, in the summertime, maybe in like the southwest region of the United States. We're talking Nevada, Arizona, Utah, maybe even Southern California, just big wide open spaces. I think this thing would absolutely thrive in the desert. So I did as much testing as I was able to do with this truck, but I want to take you guys inside the cab, show you the controls, and talk about how you can actually adjust this thing in real time. So hopping up into the cab here, really nice limited package on this Ram. Now, since this truck is a prototype, the controls for the liquid spring suspension is not mounted or anything right now. It's just kind of wired in and you can pick it up and move it around. I believe this control pad will be mounted somewhere on the interior, but for now, it gives me the ability to show you guys a little bit easier. So I'm going to start this by firing up the truck, get the power flowing. And now you can see we have our settings lit up here on the pad. So currently in comfort mode, normal ride height, and it's really cut and dry, very simple. The one thing that I can't really show you, but I can speak to very highly of, is actually the ride setting. So comfort is going to be good for those washboard roads when you're kind of bumping around off-road. The suspension becomes very floaty, very comfortable. So if there's a lot of potholes or whatever it may be, that's going to obviously be your most comfortable setting. Normal is probably what I've been driving this truck on the most, just kind of around town, maybe some back Forest Service roads, things like that. But when you get into some of the mountain passes and you get some really curvy back roads, I would suggest bumping up to Sport, which really stiffens the suspension and you feel a lot less body roll. The zero torsion subframe on the back actually plays a huge factor in this because you don't really feel the weight of the camper moving around, but that is all stuff that you would just kind of have to play with for yourself and set that accordingly to what feels best to you. Now, when it comes to the different ride height modes, normal is going to be the default. So when you're traveling over, I believe 20, maybe 25 miles per hour, it's going to default to this normal setting, and it's going to remain at that until you drop down to a lower speed when you're off-road or in a parking lot or whatever. Then you are able to adjust the height. So let's hop on the outside of the truck and see what this actually looks like. Now, I don't have the exact measurements for you guys off the top of my head of where the ride height actually is and how much ground clearance you have, but you can find a lot of information over on Storyteller Overland's website. I believe every truck is going to differ just ever so slightly. So let's start this first all the way down on the low mode. I'm going to click down on the height button, and you will notice back end is dropping down, and now the front end will drop. And that's about it. Right there, we are in low mode. I would say that low mode is probably going to be best for when you're parked at camp. If you want to get in and out of the capsule a lot easier, this is going to be the setting. If you do drive around in this mode, at least on this specific truck, you are going to rub a little bit with those 41-inch Continental tires up front. So that's just something to keep in mind. Obviously, when you're driving at a normal speed, it's going to automatically bump up to the medium setting or the normal setting. Now, if I bump up just one, we're going to go into a mid-low mode. So the suspension comes up a little bit, and I believe on this mode the nose is lifted just ever so slightly. You could probably get away with driving like this for a little while without rubbing. The low mode is obviously the most extreme. And then if I bump up one more time into the normal setting, now the rear end will come up ever so slightly just to level things out, and this is going to be set back to the normal mode. This is what you are going to be driving in like 95% of the time. Now, in between normal and the highest setting, there is a mid-high. So if I bump up one more time, you'll notice again that the front end will lift ever so slightly. Actually, maybe that adjusts the back. It's hard to tell when I'm sitting in here. Let's go back to normal. Okay, yeah. Feels like the back of the truck is coming up. So again, mid-high. It's lifting that rear end just a little bit. I guess that would be good if you have like a big load back there. If you have a trailer behind and you're towing, or you just have a lot of gear loaded out. And then obviously, in my opinion, one of the coolest settings is the high mode. So this is going to give you the absolute most ground clearance. Let's bump up to that. And now the entire truck is going to go up. Front and rear, this is going to give you, man, I don't even know how much ground clearance, but it's a lot. This truck is huge. Now let me make these adjustments one more time with me standing next to the truck. Right now the running board is coming up to above my kneecap, and we're gonna go from the high mode all the way down to the low mode. Now the bottom of the side step rail is well below my kneecap, so we're looking at least 8 inches. It might be like almost a foot of adjustment there. Again, hard to tell. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but if you guys want to find out some more specs, you can of course head over to Storyteller Overland's website. Now let's jump back in here because I want to talk more about the driving experience. If you start this truck, you will notice that you have a message here, full exhaust brake on. That is one of the best features of this truck, and that button is found right here near the auxiliary switches. So when you have that on, the truck is going to automatically engine brake for you, and that makes a huge difference, especially here in Colorado when you're going up and down big mountain passes. Once you press that button, it will automatically default to on every time you start the truck, and the one button that I would recommend pressing, especially if you're in places with some higher elevation, is the tow haul mode. This setting is going to give you a lot more power off the line, especially when you're doing some steep climbs, whether it's off-road, on a highway, whatever it may be. You can still drive around with that off. However, when you're in a place like Colorado, I would recommend leaving that on full time. With that on and the engine brake on, the truck drives great. Speaking of the engine brake, with that setting on, you rarely have to use the brakes in this thing because it does such a good job at slowing you down with the engine braking and the transmission. I will say that if you're going down really long, steep grades, you want to be a little bit careful because you could heat up that transmission and you could run into some issues, but for the most part, the engine braking has not failed me yet. If you do have to use the brakes, I will say that this truck will stop when you want it to, but it requires a lot of force on the brake. Obviously, this is a huge, heavy truck. I believe it's probably around 20,000 pounds. The GVWR on the door here says 19,500. You have a 31,000 pound towing capacity. This is a large truck, so obviously the brakes need to match that. They do work, they are effective, but the engine brake has been doing most of the work for me. When you do need to hit the brakes, you just have to put your foot down pretty hard. Now, another cool feature of this chassis combined with the Hilt is obviously you're using the engine power to generate power to the batteries back there. If you want to high idle this truck, all you have to do is set the cruise control here, tap that set button, and the truck will automatically high idle just like that. So if your batteries are running low and you're in the backcountry, cruise control on, tap set, and then you can high idle, and now the engine is putting power into the house batteries back there. I think this is a pretty cool feature. It's something that my Storyteller mode van does not have. The Beast mode comes with it, but it's a little bit different. I think I would prefer this kind of manual way to set it as opposed to on the vans where the van, when it's activated, I believe just kind of starts up and will high idle until you get to a certain threshold on your batteries. I rarely run out of power, and especially with a truck like this, you could be off grid for a long time, parked without running the motor and the battery back there. The 16.8 kilowatt system of Lithionics, that's going to last most people a very long time. Now, as far as other features go here in the cab, there's not a whole lot to talk about, but a ton of storage everywhere you look. There's a bunch of different compartments, big cup holders, all this stuff slides around. You have obviously CarPlay, Android Auto, charge ports, aux cord. Down here is where you will find your 4 high and your 4 low controls. This is very easy to activate. You can actually do it while you're driving. There's probably a certain speed that you can't go over when doing that, but to activate 4-wheel drive, you simply press the button, and I've only used that once when I was camping the other night. Now, one last thing that I want to talk about inside the cab is something that I actually had to struggle with and figure out myself for a little while. For this pass-through to get into the living portion of the Hilt, you do have to have the seat folded down, and I could not find a handle, a pull strap, or anything, so the way Dodge does this is kind of interesting. The downside is that it would be pretty difficult to do while you are inside the actual living portion, so if you want to have access to pass through between the cab and the capsule, you probably want to have the seat down basically all the time. So if I lift the seat up until it stops, the front here also lifts up, and it lifts the back of the seat up. The hook goes over like the retention point on the back of the truck, put that down, and now it's locked into place. If you wanted to fold the seat down from the inside, you would have to kind of reach up here, maybe like a little strap on the front would be easy. You have to lift the seat up just a little bit so that hook disengages, and then you can push the seat down. That's how you fold the seats down. I've never seen another truck that does it this way, and again, I don't hate it, I don't love it, but it is one thing to note. I also need to apologize for this one. I told you guys I was going to find a more accurate miles per gallon reading. Right now, I believe the truck was reading like 7.6 miles per gallon, and that's driving up and down the mountains in Colorado. That number is going to be off because the speedo is off with these large tires on here. I think the speedo is off by like roughly 10 miles per hour. So the miles per gallon that the truck is indicating is probably also a little bit low. I think this truck is probably getting between 10 and 12 depending on where you're driving. Obviously, it's going to dip a lot lower than that if you are constantly pulling up some mountain passes. And with the tank setup on this, the trucks are going to come with 52 gallons of fuel, which you fill on the capsule side. This is a prototype truck, so there is a secondary tank, and I think the big tank siphons into the little tank. Because of that, I couldn't get an accurate readout. I did fill this truck up twice with about $125 worth of fuel. And unless you're filling up at a truck pump, a normal diesel pump where you're filling up like a truck or any kind of car that's diesel, Generally, they're going to be limited unless you go into the station and pay, so a whole lot to talk about there. I apologize, I don't have an accurate readout on miles per gallon, but once these are in the hands of actual owners, I'm sure you can find some good information out there, and it shouldn't be too long. Now, last but certainly not least, the inside of this thing. It's just like a Storyteller van. Similar switches, but just a lot more room. You got the mode comm and a lot more lights. It's like a Storyteller van if you're familiar with them, but bigger, more spacious. You could have more family and friends in here with you. I really like the whole layout of this truck. It just kind of makes sense, and if I was designing a truck like this, I would probably do it very similarly. Huge space for the kitchen, which you can see me cooking in the previous video. The bathroom with the shower, which gets really hot. The fridge, I only put food in here for one meal, and obviously you could probably pack like 2 weeks worth of food in there, depending on how many ingredients you use to cook. Big freezer, which I didn't even get the chance to use. And also the microwave and the convection oven. I've actually never even used a convection oven like this, so I'm not sure what you could do with that as far as like meals go, but I'm sure it would be a blast to use. So much space back here when I'm working by myself. I can just kind of throw my gear all over the place, and while this table at the dinette is a little bit small, it's plenty good for me working on my computer. You could probably sit maybe 4 people here, all working on laptops. The only thing that this is really missing for work, I think, would be internet access, like a Starlink or something of that nature. So I've given you guys a lot of my impressions on the interior of this thing in the last video, and hopefully I already answered a lot of your questions. If you have any more, you can drop them in the comments of this video, and I'll try to answer anything as best as possible. And like I mentioned, the HILT is going back to Storyteller. However, in the future, if you guys are interested in seeing more, maybe I can weasel my way into taking one of these out on a proper trip. So I think that's all that I had for now. I just wanted to give a huge thank you to Storyteller for giving me this opportunity to test out a vehicle like this. I would love to own one someday, but right now it's obviously not in the cards. I got my hands full of a lot of other projects, which you guys are going to see here on the channel pretty soon, and some stuff I think you guys are going to really enjoy. So if you want to stick around for that stuff, make sure you consider clicking subscribe on this channel, turn on notifications because I'm probably still shadow banned. I do make videos every single week, and I will continue to do so for hopefully years and years to come. Now that's all that I have for the HILT right now. Again, I really hope you guys enjoyed this series, and maybe we will continue it in the future. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you in the next one.